What it is, people, my name is Batman, and I wanted to make a follow-up video to that DLC video I released because in regards to the content cut from Destiny to be presumably reshipped as DLC, the plot thickens. I have found what I consider a smoking gun. You might have seen this already. I came by it on the forums, and in fact, if you were watching trailers before the game's release, you've definitely seen this, you just never got to play it. This is from the official PlayStation Destiny gameplay reveal trailer, about 90 seconds in. This is the Reef, alright? You got an apparently friendly, fallen Vandal guard over here on the left. The only non-hostile Vandals we ever saw worked for the Queen of the Reef, and if you look out at the background, it's basically identical to the backgrounds we saw in those two brief cutscenes in the Reef. And I always thought it was kind of mysterious that they had this entire location on the galaxy map that was, only used for two cutscenes. But now I think it's pretty safe to say that at one point the Reef was intended to have more than just two cutscenes in it. You got the player in third-person mode, unarmed, which tells us that this was a tower-like area, a safe haven of some sort. Presumably it had shops and maybe its own bounties. We cannot speculate beyond that, but it's obviously not a combat area or this guy wouldn't be unarmed and in the third person. And if you look in front of him, there are also two other unarmed guardians as well. So one of the rationalizations I saw a lot of people trying to make in the last video about the cut content was this argument that the content we have seen in trailers or managed to access on our own discs isn't necessarily finished, and in fact that's the official line from Bungie and Activision as well in regards to the entire controversy. That's what they've announced, is simply that the content isn't finished. That these things are placeholders, and I might buy into that if it was something like just that hypogeum strike that we had found, but there's a big difference between empty spaces or entrances for planned content and the fully texturized playable content we have seen that is clearly playable and with much of it already being on the disc. This Reef content right here looks pretty complete to me. It is a fully texturized, three-dimensional area. It looks like a lot of work went into that highly detailed background image. But it's done, it's playable, and it's even populated with AI. And this was a year ago. This was a reveal trailer. Whatever was left to do with this piece of content, they had a year left to do it. And the same sentiment applies to a lot of the content we saw in the trailer, again, such as that forest area that did not make it into the final game either. If it wasn't finished in those trailers, then it had to have been pretty close, because it was fully texturized, it was three-dimensional, it was playable, it had AI. And it doesn't make sense that with a year left, they weren't able to put the finishing touches on. So there are only two rational possibilities. The first being that if we see this content in future DLC, then it was cut from the main game to repackage as DLC, so that they could profit from said DLC without having to spend as much to make the DLC because it's already made. Or the second possibility is that it's got scrapped for some reason and we'll never see it again. And I already went into huge, lengthy explanations of each of these possibilities, so I won't rehash that. But people keep making this argument in the comments about the content not being finished, and I just want to be very clear about the fact that that argument is silly. Especially because if it wasn't finished and they had reasonable doubts about not completing it in time for the game's release, which was only a year away after 4 years of development, then they shouldn't have been showing it off in a trailer, because that would be false advertising. And something else they shouldn't have been showing off in the trailer is the developers talking about their game. Look at what this guy has to say in the same trailer.
We take you to a lot of places, you see a lot of things, there's a lot of strange creatures and strange monsters and beings and ships and worlds. You can go from Earth to Venus to Mars to the Moon to Saturn.
So I'm not going to go into that, there's not much more to say. This guy thought Saturn would be in the game, obviously it wasn't. It just doesn't add up. And I just can't think of any reasonable explanation for why all of this shit would get cut. And if Saturn and the Reef end up in a DLC pack down the road when this content was obviously intended for the base game upon its initial release, then what conclusion could we draw other than this content was cut to be repackaged as DLC and milk us for everything we're worth? It's sneaky and unprofessional. There are companies that fuck you in a professional manner so that you at least aren't aware that you're being fucked, like Monsanto. And then there's companies who don't even try to be discreet about fucking you because they put it on blast in their own goddamn trailers. Now, something people keep asking is, do we blame Activision or Bungie? Probably Activision. I imagine most Bungie employees are pretty ashamed of this product, especially after all the work they put into it. And you'll recall that's one of the reasons I speculated the lead writer quit Bungie so abruptly and out of the blue. I don't think Joseph Staten wanted to put his name on this. But At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you blame. There's no point in trying to separate them because for at least the next 10 years, they are tied at the hip contractually. It doesn't matter if it was Activision or Bungie. And I think it's also time that we start asking, is Bungie really Bungie anymore? I mean, we know that following Bungie's departure from Microsoft, a lot of the talent stayed behind at 343 to continue working on Halo. That includes the lead multiplayer designer, who has been getting a lot of attention for the Master Chief Collection the last couple of days. We know that the studio's size when it was working on Halo was about 120, and then for Destiny that shot up to over 500. So roughly 400 of those employees, the majority of the studio at this point, aren't the same people who worked on Halo. And now the lead writer for Halo is gone. And then they fucking fired Marty O'Donnell, everybody's favorite music composer of all time. And when they fired him, he claimed it was without cause, and I believe he is currently suing them. And then they released this cheesy statement that said, "Today, as friends, we say goodbye. We know that wherever his journey takes him, he will always have a bright and hopeful future. We wish him luck in all his future endeavors." And this is their go-to strategy, right? Pull some sketchy-ass shit and then release a really nice, heartfelt, innocent-sounding statement about it that is completely misleading and actually kind of creepy when put in the proper context. That's what they did when people first started catching on to all this content controversy. Bungie released a statement talking about the precious time we have together and not wasting it on silly things like trying to figure out if we got scammed or not. It's very frustrating. And something else we saw in this trailer that I thought was interesting was the upgrade tree for your weapons. It's aesthetically different, obviously, but notice that it apparently only requires weapon kits, which I'm assuming are weapon parts, and glimmer. There's no requirement for spirit blooms or spin metal or any of that bullshit. And the Thunderlord currently requires ascendant energy at the end of its upgrade tree to be fully upgraded, but in this trailer from only a year ago, it didn't. And this is interesting to me because that's my least favorite part of this game, is driving around from cave to cave, farming these resources and completing the same story missions over and over again as dailies. It's just so boring and monotonous and repetitive. And now it looks like it was a last-minute addition. That's what this image suggests. A year ago, it seems that weapons did not need ascendant energy or spin metal or what have you to be upgraded. Now they do, but why? Why would they throw in this lame fucking requirement at the last minute? The only reasonable theory I can come up with is that they really wanted to drag your playtime out as long as humanly possible. I mean, think about it. They recently announced that the new level cap will be 32 when the DLC releases in December. Think about what that means for a second. To get to level 30, you had to have 3 pieces of raid gear and an exotic helmet. To fully upgrade all that gear, you had to go and farm probably well over 200 upgrade materials in the open world, right? Because every upgrade is like 16 spirit blooms or whatever. And you also had to probably get somewhere around 100 Ascendant shards as well to upgrade all those different pieces of armor. And to get that raid gear in the first place, you had to beat the raid on normal, and to beat it on normal, you most likely had to have had a fully upgraded set of legendary armor, which means you had to get 200 upgrade materials and 100 Ascendant shards on 2 separate occasions already. And if you're really unlucky, you bought an exotic chest piece or arms or boots, put the time in to get that fully upgraded, only to discover that the only way to reach level 30 is with an exotic helmet, so the time you put into upgrading that other exotic armor was a complete waste of time. Now, if it takes 3 pieces of fully upgraded raid gear to get from level 29 to 30, what do you think it's going to take to get from 30 to 32? It means you're probably going to have to acquire all the new DLC raid gear and get that fully upgraded too. That means all the armor you currently have will have to be replaced, and you're going to have to go through the painful process of having to farm another 200 or so upgrade materials to upgrade all your new armor, and another 100 Ascendant materials as well. Not to mention all the bounties you'll have to do over and over again to unlock the upgrades in the first place, the same bounties you've already done again and again, hundreds of times over. You are not done driving around from cave to cave farming spirit blooms. You are just getting started. And what a waste of life it is. And I'm not fucking doing it. In the last video, people kept saying, oh, he already owns it, he'll still play the DLC. No, I won't. Because I'm not farming any more fucking spirit blooms. I'm done with that shit. I will never do that again in my life. The vast majority of your playtime in this game is spent replaying the same exact content over and over again, whether it's the same bounties for XP, the same story missions for Ascendants, or the same caves for spirit blooms. You will replay this content again and again and again so that you can acquire better gear and reach the max level. And you know what's going to happen when you finally reach max level? When you finally get all that fully upgraded gear you've worked towards for so long and so hard? Nothing is going to happen. It's like when a dog chases the garbage truck. It has no idea what to do with it when it finally catches up. You'll have maxed out gear, and then you'll realize there's nothing left to do that you haven't already done a bazillion fucking times. You can grind the same raid missions and strikes, but this time you won't even have any goals to work towards. So instead, you can start another character and do it all over again. Or just wait until the next DLC, then they can bump the level cap up to 34 and your ass can go exploring super epic and dynamic caves for another 200 upgrade materials and beat the same story missions 50 times over for another 100 Ascendant materials. They have this shit down to a science. It is a scientifically engineered and masterfully designed hamster wheel. They have taken the manipulation of the rewards and incentive circuits in your brain to the next fucking level. And their goal is to keep you from reaching max level for as long as possible, because once you do, you'll be faced with the grim reality that you are a rat on a hamster wheel. Based on this image we see from the trailer where the gun doesn't need upgrade materials or ascendant materials, I cannot help but think that those ascendants and upgrade materials were put in at the last minute as a clever ploy to drag out playtime as long as possible. Because playtime is what drives word of mouth. The more you're playing, the more likely you are to encourage your friend to get the game and play with you so that you're not so bored while you drive around from cave to cave. Word of mouth is the most powerful form of marketing, and especially so for games. Using these things to drag out playtime explains why they nerfed the Queen's Wrath event so that it stopped giving out ascendants, even though that made the event itself completely pointless. I think it explains the recent Atheon patch that randomizes who gets teleported, because within 24 hours of the Vault of Glass raid going live, everyone knew that was how it worked. Everyone knew that the 3 players farthest away from Atheon got teleported. My squad figured it out on our first try without a YouTube video, but it was all over YouTube within 24 hours. Surely Bungie figured out pretty early on that we knew how it worked, and yet it took them 2 months to decide that that's not how they want us to play it. But they claimed they always wanted it to be random, but then why didn't they just make it randomized in the first place? Why not update it right away once they figured out everyone knew how to manipulate the teleport? I think they figured out people were beating the raid too quickly and that it was too easy, so they figured out a way to make it a little harder and make it take a little longer to complete and thus increase your playtime. And the random loot system works just like a casino. In the casinos, they have mathematicians work out the equations for exactly how often someone will win, and then they can set the price to play accordingly to guarantee the casino always makes a profit. There is nothing unpredictable about chance when the pool of people taking that chance is large enough. Bungie sets the chances for you to roll for whatever piece of gear, so they already know how many rolls it will take on average. Activision sets a target playtime for every player. Someone with a math degree calculates how much playtime it will take for X amount of rolls, then sets up the rarity of high rolls so that on average the player base has to play the set target amount of time for X amount of rolls to get X piece of gear once. They've broken it down to a science, and now they have 20 million hamsters playing slots at the casino. A casino that they only decided to throw in during the last year of development after all the ads had rolled. And ultimately, that is what will be their undoing. Please remember to rate. This is Batman signing out.